His ships arrived on a Monday, slipping into orbit without a whisper. They weren't elegant or beautiful. They were massive, jagged things, hulking silhouettes blotting out the stars. No energy blasts. No dramatic entrance. They simply appeared, as if they had always been there, unnoticed until now. All across Earth, telescopes strained to capture images. Governments scrambled jets. Civilians stared upward with a mixture of terror and awe. For a full day, the ships hung in the sky like dark omens, unmoving, untouchable. Then, without ceremony, every screen flickered. From ancient box TVs to brand-new holographic projectors, a single image bled into existence. A towering alien with cracked ivory skin and sharp, mirrored eyes. It wore no armor, carried no weapons. It didn't need to. When it spoke, the translation echoed in a cold monotone. This world poses no threat. Your kind offers no challenge. You are beneath conquest. And just like that, Earth was dismissed. The news channels tried to spin it, some claiming it was a relief, others crying humiliation. Protests erupted in major cities. Pride, it seemed, was harder to swallow than fear. The aliens, later known as the Varn, showed no interest in diplomacy. No councils, no treaties. They ignored the United Nations' urgent broadcasts. They ignored the fighter jets circling in vain. They ignored the missiles locked and loaded. Instead, they landed in a place nobody expected, Ridgestone, Nevada. A blip of a town, Ridgestone clung to the edge of a desert nobody wanted. Population, about 800. Amenities, a gas station, a diner, an old church, and a few hundred miles of dirt. The first alien craft unfolded itself on the outskirts, its hull twisting in unnatural ways. It planted spindly supports into the sand and began drilling with lazy precision. Locals gathered behind the diner's broken fence, clutching cell phones and cans of warm beer. Nobody stopped them. There were no soldiers here yet, no walls of men in black suits. Just farmers, ranchers, truck drivers, and one kid named Toby who set up a lemonade stand for 50 cents a cup. The aliens didn't even glance at the crowd. Long-limbed and indifferent, they floated about their machines, collecting samples and muttering in their language, an eerie blend of high-pitched whistles and deep grating sounds. When Toby, dragging his little red wagon full of lemonade, approached them boldly, the nearest alien bent down to inspect him. There was no threat detected, no alarm raised, just a small human selling sugar water in a plastic cup. The Varn found it amusing. They thought they understood Earth. They thought they knew what they were dealing with. But under the dry sands of Ridgestone, something old had begun to stir. Something waiting. Long before Ridgestone was even a dot on a map, the government had been digging here. Back in the days of black and white television and whispered threats of nuclear winter, something had been found beneath the desert. Something no one could explain. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a natural formation. It was other. Instead of announcing the discovery, the higher-ups chose a different path. They built a false mining operation. They brought in engineers, physicists, and experts whose names never made it into history books. Deep underground, they constructed a labyrinth of steel corridors and reinforced vaults around the find. The project was secret even among secrets. Funding came from nowhere, and supplies vanished into the sand without a trace. Whatever they uncovered, it scared them. Enough to risk lives. Enough to bury the truth under concrete, red tape, and silence. The facility's name was erased. Workers who survived the construction spoke of strange accidents. Tools moving by themselves, shadows that didn't belong, humming noises that never stopped. After one catastrophic failure, the entire operation was sealed off and left to rot. And the desert, as deserts do, forgot. Until now. When the Varn's drills punched into the crust of the earth, vibrations rippled outward in waves. Machines that hadn't breathed in decades twitched. Lights blinked awake, casting faint glows over rusted catwalks. Deep inside the largest chamber, ancient cables flexed as if stretching after a long sleep. In the diner back in town, coffee mugs rattled on tables. Car alarms wailed without reason. Old radios, long broken, sputtered to life, spitting bursts of static and garbled voices. A few residents noticed. Most didn't. Sheriff Anders, a man who had been too tired to care about much for the last 10 years, found himself staring at the radio in his cruiser as it buzzed with fractured sentences. Still active, containment breached, prepare. He smacked the dashboard. The transmission cut off. Just another weird thing to add to the growing pile. At the drilling site, the Varn pressed deeper, unaware. Their instruments chirped happily as they cataloged soil samples and mineral compositions. Data flowed into their portable cores, analyzed and filed away. Humans, to them, were background noise. Nothing more. But 30 meters below the drilling platform, the buried facility stirred with rising energy. Panels snapped open. Pressure valves released ancient air with hissing sighs. Gears groaned against time's decay. And then came the thud. Soft at first, like a heartbeat in the earth. Thud. Thud. The Varn didn't notice. They were too busy congratulating themselves for finding what they thought would be an easy harvest. They never considered the consequences of waking something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. At first, it was just a tremor. The drilling rigs wobbled slightly, causing the Varn engineers to glance at their readouts. Seismic activity minimal. No cause for alarm. They continued without hesitation, carving deeper into the crust of a world they barely respected. Another tremor followed, stronger. Cracks spidered across the sandy ground. A few local onlookers gasped and backed away, but the aliens simply adjusted their stabilizers. They had faced worse. They had conquered planets that fought back with molten rock and storms of glass. To them, this was nothing, until the ground behind the drill collapsed. A gaping wound tore open, coughing up dust and pieces of blackened metal. From the exposed cavity, a structure rose, forced upward by mechanisms deep within the earth. It wasn't a building. It wasn't a weapon they recognized. It was a sphere. Perfect, massive, covered in moving etchings that seemed to crawl across its surface like living things. Colors bled across it, purples, blues, reds, fading into one another like oil on water. The Varn backed away, their laughter dying. Their sensors scanned the object rapidly. Readings came back in nonsense strings. No match found. No origin recorded. Energy levels spiking beyond safe thresholds. Still, they moved closer. Curiosity had undone greater species than theirs. One of them, braver or more foolish than the rest, extended a three-fingered hand toward the sphere. It barely grazed the surface. And the world changed. The sky dimmed, not with clouds but with something deeper. A pressure filled the air, tightening around every living thing. The humans stumbled back, clutching their heads, their teeth grinding involuntarily. The sphere cracked down the middle with a noise like 1,000 doors slamming at once. From within, something unfolded. It had no face, no eyes, no mouth, only a towering form draped in shifting plates of armor that seemed to phase between solid and translucent with every movement. It didn't walk. It glided, leaving the air itself torn in its wake. The Varn panicked. Weapons were drawn. Commands barked in shrill tones. Shields flared to life in jagged bursts of light. The towering figure turned toward them, as if noticing their presence for the first time. It raised an arm. The earth beneath the Varn units exploded upward in a chaotic spiral. Metal twisted. Engines ruptured. Some aliens were hurled hundreds of meters into the sky, their bodies falling limp before they hit the ground. For all their technology, for all their centuries of domination, the Varn had never encountered a defense like this. The figure spoke, though no sound crossed the distance. The message was planted directly into the mind. Protocol 0 initiated. Threat classification, invasive species. Neutralization underway. A second tremor rippled outward, this one deliberate. The real battle had begun, and the Varn, for all their arrogance, were already losing. The Varn reacted with the efficiency of a species forged by war. Within seconds, portable artillery units unfolded from sleek cases. Beams of searing green light lanced toward the towering figure. Air sizzled where the shots passed, burning holes through ancient rock. The figure didn't flinch. Every blast, every projectile, every desperate strike bent away at the last moment, curving around the entity like water flowing around an unseen wall. The Varn adjusted, deploying combat drones that buzzed into formation, each one armed with plasma cannons capable of gutting fortresses. They circled the figure, opening fire in tight, calculated bursts. It didn't matter. With a motion slower than breathing, the figure extended both arms outward. From the ground, tendrils of metallic roots erupted, snapping through the drones like knives through cloth. Explosions rippled across the battlefield, smoke rising in thick, oily plumes. The humans, still gathered at the town's edge, could only watch. Some recorded with trembling hands. Some prayed. A few just stood in stunned silence, faces bathed in the sickly light of distant fires. Sheriff Anders had seen a lot in his years, floods, fires, even a tornado once, but nothing prepared him for this. He backed toward his cruiser, never taking his eyes off the nightmare unfolding. The Varn ground forces regrouped. Commanders barked orders in clipped, frantic tones. Armored troopers formed defensive lines, shields locked together, rifles raised. The figure tilted its head. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then the air fractured. Reality itself seemed to ripple outward from the figure in jagged waves. Shields blinked out. Weapons exploded in the hands of their wielders. Varn soldiers were flung backward, as if caught in a hurricane made of gravity and broken rules. Ships hovering above Ridgestone tried to flee, engines howling, but the sky warped around them. Some vanished into nothingness. Others twisted into grotesque shapes before crumpling into the desert like discarded toys. And still the figure advanced. It was not fast. It did not need to be. Every step it took reshaped the battlefield. Roads cracked. Light posts bent away. Sand rose in unnatural spirals, dancing around the entity as if in worship or fear. The Varn's arrogance had died minutes ago. Now, only survival mattered, and even that slipped further from their grasp with each passing second. In a final act of desperation, one of the larger Varn transports powered up a weapon so dangerous it was reserved for glassing worlds. It fired. The beam struck the figure dead center. For a moment, dust and energy roared outward in a blinding surge. The humans shielded their faces. Windows shattered miles away. The desert itself seemed to weep under the force. When the light faded, hope collapsed. The figure still stood, untouched. It raised its hand again. This time, the Varn ship simply folded inward, collapsing into a tight knot of shrieking metal before vanishing from existence altogether. There was no victory for the invaders. There was no mercy. There was only the judgment of something far older and far angrier than they could ever comprehend. The battle ended not with a final explosion, but with a heavy silence that blanketed Ridgestone. The figure stood alone among the wreckage, a titan against a graveyard of burning ships and shattered machines. No more Varn forces advanced. No more weapons fired. They had either been destroyed, fled, or simply ceased to exist. From behind cracked windows and battered fences, the townsfolk watched in stunned disbelief. They weren't warriors. They weren't heroes. They were witnesses to something that didn't fit into any story they'd ever been told. Sheriff Anders, moving like a man much older than his years, lifted the old radio handset in his cruiser and tried again to call for help. Only static answered. No air support. No military rescue. No government official swooping in to explain the madness. It was just them, and whatever had awoken beneath their feet. The figure turned slowly, facing the town. A ripple of fear ran through the crowd. Mothers clutched their children. Men stepped instinctively in front of their families. Even the bravest among them felt the primal instinct to run. But the figure did not attack. Instead, it moved toward the exposed remains of the underground facility. Metal doors, torn from their hinges by the earlier tremors, lay scattered like discarded toys. With each step, the sphere from which the figure had emerged pulsed faintly, as if tethered to it by invisible threads. Toby, the lemonade stand kid, stared wide-eyed, clutching the handle of his wagon. His lemonade had spilled long ago, forgotten in the dust. The figure paused at the broken entrance. From its chest, a cluster of lights blinked in a pattern that seemed almost thoughtful. Then, a panel embedded in the exposed rock wall slid open, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Without hesitation, the figure descended. Sheriff Anders cursed under his breath, torn between instinct and duty. Finally, after a long moment, he motioned for a few brave souls to follow him. The descent was steep, lit only by flickering emergency lights that had somehow survived decades of abandonment. At the bottom, they entered a massive chamber. In its center stood another sphere, smaller than the first, but radiating the same aura of impossible energy. Around it were consoles, shattered relics of forgotten science, still faintly humming. And there, scrawled across the cracked floor, was a message. Not alien. Human. In the event of breach, do not interfere. Witness only. Survival depends on it. Sheriff Anders wiped dust from his forehead, staring at the words. What the hell did we build down here? Someone whispered behind him. The figure approached the second sphere and placed a hand against its surface. Lines of ancient script flared across the chamber walls, impossible to read, yet somehow familiar in their design. Memories stirred, memories not belonging to any of them. Images of a time when Earth was not weak, not isolated. A time when it had been a center of power so great that it had to be hidden, even from itself. The townsfolk backed away slowly, overwhelmed by visions they couldn't understand. Above, the last of the Varn ships fled Earth's orbit, broadcasting frantic warnings across the stars. Earth was not harmless. Earth was not to be trifled with. Earth remembered. The figure remained motionless, hand pressed against the sphere, as waves of unseen force pulsed through the chamber. The townsfolk stood frozen, their minds brushing against something vast and ancient. Some felt awe. Others felt terror. None could explain what churned within them. Only that it was bigger than history, bigger than fear itself. Sheriff Anders stumbled back against a console, steadying himself. Sweat rolled down his temples. His fingers brushed across a panel, and for a brief second, it flickered to life. On the cracked display, a diagram spun into view. Earth, not as it was now, but crowned with satellites of impossible size. Fleets clustered in orbit. Outposts on other worlds. Humanity, not as broken dreamers, but as architects of dominion across the stars. It hadn't been myth. It hadn't been ambition. It had been memory. Is this real? Someone whispered behind him. Anders didn't answer. Deep inside, he knew the truth. They all did. Somehow, humanity had once ruled among the stars, and for reasons lost to time, it had chosen to forget. The figure turned from the sphere at last. Slowly, it approached the humans gathered near the stairwell. Every step it took felt heavy with meaning. It stopped a few paces away and knelt, bringing itself to their level. From the center of its form, a projection unfurled, an image of the Earth, slowly rotating. Tiny points of light flickered across continents, as if marking hidden places. The message came not through words, but through knowing. Custodianship passed. Inheritance unlocked. Prepare. The projection dissolved. Then, without fanfare, the figure began to collapse, plates folding inward, light dimming. Within seconds, it was gone, leaving only the silent, humming sphere behind. Above, the sky began to clear. The fires died. The ground settled. The surviving Varn ships had already vanished into the void, their arrogance shattered. Their messages would spread across empires, across alliances, carrying the warning. Earth was not to be approached lightly. Earth had guardians unseen. And worst of all, Earth was waking up. Sheriff Anders stood in the silence, staring at the place where the figure had knelt. He knew life would never go back to the way it had been. Ridgestone wouldn't stay a forgotten town much longer. The world would come knocking. Governments, scientists, military commanders. But for now, for a brief, precious moment, he and the others were alone with the truth. They had not been spared because they were weak. They had been left alone because the galaxy had been terrified of what humanity might remember if ever pushed too far. And now they remembered. In the distance, hidden beneath miles of Earth, other facilities stirred. Machines hummed back to life. Vaults creaked open. Earth, the sleeping giant, was rising once more.